You're listening to the She Lift Project podcast, a show dedicated to helping women achieve higher levels of success in the workplace. No matter where you are in your career, we want to help you grow. Now here's your host, Cynthia Kirkpatrick, a CPA, CFP, and Senior Financial Advisor at Moneta Group.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the She Lift Project podcast. I'm Cynthia Kirkpatrick and I'm happy to have you with us, and we're excited to have Kristie Jones with us today. Kristie, sales coach, expert extraordinaire. What I loved looking at and reading is your take no prisoners approach. That really stood out to me when helping companies and individuals drive their sales and customer success. You do a lot of presentations, speaking, podcasts, and upcoming book. Just so many things going on in your history, track record, and to come. So excited for you to join to talk about your story, what you're doing now, how you got here, and tips, tricks along the way. And also, at some point, we'll get to this, but any differences you've seen in how women approach sales, strengths, opportunities. So anyway, first, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Cynthia, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Great. Well, I talked a little bit about the sales, what you're doing now. I'm sure there's a lot of opportunities for sales coaching and helping companies, but also a bunch of different ways to do it. And so you work with venture capital firms a lot, and you come in. And so tell me more about that and what you're doing right now.
Yeah. So I'm in my 7th year of business and really been blessed that 100% of my clients come from referrals. Part of them come from VC companies that I have relationships with who've just invested normally a Series A round. So a few million, I say, just a few million here and there. And then the rest come founder to founder. So founders who talk to each other. But the startup world is actually smaller than you think it is. And I don't really play in the Silicon Valley world. So I do a lot of the Midwest. And then I have a few European clients as well. So I really do appreciate, I think the reason that the difference is I get my hands dirty, I say. So I don't just come in and evaluate everything and give you your playbook and then walk away. I'm actually in there working with you, helping you with your CRM system, helping you document and build out the processes. So I think you have to get your hands dirty at this stage. So a lot of these companies are coming out of what we call founder-led sales. So up until getting that funding from the VC or some angel investment, a lot of them are doing the sales, right? They're the first salesperson, which is actually the best idea. That's the best thing to do. They can figure out their go-to-market messaging. Do they have product market fit? What are the objections? What are the things that may need to be improved within the product? So I always recommend that founders do their first stint as an AE or an account executive. But at some point, you've got to walk away from that, right? They're going to have to fundraise again. They've got other things that they need to worry about. So they can't play full-time sales rep forever. But once they get that funding, normally the VCs will insist that they step out of the sales role and we build out the sales team.
So it sounds like, in layman's terms, to go from, one small shop, they want to grow, they've gotten some funding, and they really need help getting to that next level, because if they tried to muddle through it, it would take too long or wouldn't get there. So you're able to come in, use your expertise from doing it with a lot of different companies and say, okay, here's where we're at, here's where we need to go, and help them analyze it and implement it, and really at a faster pace get to that next level to grow and bring on more revenue, bring on more salespeople. Is that an easy explanation?
Yeah, I called it, I say I'm an extra set of expertise hands. So yes, I think a lot of people, I think part of it is the speed of which things can get done when you know what you're doing. But a lot of founders are tech founders, so they don't have a sales or marketing background. And so as a result of that, like I say, like you have a limited, you may have gotten 5 million, 8 million, 10 million. Sounds like a lot of money, but it goes really quickly. We spend it on people and product, I say. So, hiring people costs a lot of money. Founders may or may not have even been paying themselves at that point. So that's an opportunity for them to start making some income, but it goes really quickly. So you don't want to make mistakes in hiring. You don't want to, take twice as long to get your processes together. So yeah, I really want to come in and help them do it right and do it right the first time, and then do it more quickly than they might otherwise be doing it. The VC firms want their return on investment as quickly as possible.
Right.
So patience is not part of our game.
Well, and you said you've been doing this for about 7 years?
Yeah, I've been in tech sales. So I was a VP of sales going back to 2000, but 7 years ago, I started Sales Acceleration Group. And I'd already kind of picked my swim lane. I'd already picked early startups kind of as my swim lane in the sales leadership realm. So I thought, well, I can help one company at a time, and I can only affect so many people at a time. But, now I run about 4 or 5 clients at any given time. And so I can impact a lot of people.
And is it, you started your own business at this point, solo shop, and they're buying and they're getting you.
That's right. Yeah, solopreneur. So that's always the big challenge is I've got some 1099s. So I go out into the marketplace, if you will. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people in between gigs right now, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so I'm on a few Slack channels. And so I need, a lot of times I need recruiters. I do a lot of hiring for my clients, but I'm really too busy now to vet the resumes and do phone screens. So I go out into the marketplace and find 1099 contractors in between gigs. So like even today, I'm starting a new hiring process or project with a new client in the UK. They want to hire their first director of revenue. And I went out to the Rev Genius Slack channel and posted on there, which I have done in the past and had great success with. And lo and behold, an out-of-work VP of sales and an out-of-work head of talent acquisition both approached me. And so I'm going to have both of them will help me with this next round of hires. So, I don't really, the whole decision about scaling, having employees, needing to provide insurance, it's a little daunting.
Right.
I say I lead a blessed life and I like my life a little flexible. So I think the 1099 thing seems to work out for everybody. And I've really lucked into great people that have been able to help me. So and same thing with people who in the marketing world. So a lot of times my clients need content. So we need blog posts and white papers written. I have a team of freelancers in that world that I reach out to. So I've been able to piece it together. And I think it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, at that point, it almost sounds like I'm thinking of it from a business perspective. If you had a group of people, more than one, you might be limited into who you could pull in and their expertise. But this way, you have so many contacts outside that you can really say, oh, I haven't used so-and-so for months, but now they're the person I need to pull in.
That's right.
So you can do that, which adds probably to that flexibility and that the ability to shift quickly for not what you need, but what your client needs.
That's right. Yeah. And I haven't had a bad experience yet. I've literally been able to, I think it was beginning of last week that I reached out on the Rev Genius channel under the job category and posted, and it was very, I'm very clear about it. Like, this is probably a 3-week gig. It's I pay accordingly. And it's not a get rich quick scheme, but people, again, if you've got time on your hands and you've been laid off, like, that's something that helps to your self-esteem. And so you need to feel productive. In fact, the head of the talent acquisition that had just been laid off, she's like, I'm going crazy. And she said, I've been helping people with their resumes and charging a little bit for that and doing interview prep. But she said, like, what you're looking for is what I had done every day. This is the core of what I do. And you could tell, like, it does, it really, like, even if no fault of your own, which a lot of people have been laid off recently, no fault of their own, it still does something to your self-esteem, right? In your confidence level. And so, those people are more than happy and do a phenomenal job for me. And then really I took that person, and I have another client that I'm looking for a VP of sales for. They're using a staffing firm. So I sent her resume to the person I was working with at the staffing firm. I thought, if I can help, I will. Mm-hmm. And then another gentleman that I met with that I did decide not to move forward with, but he was looking for a very specific swim lane of a VP of sales. So I sent his resume to 2 of the VCs that I work with and said, hey, I don't know if any other companies are looking for this. So, I think a lot of times we talked about before we got on the air today about networking and putting the right people together. And so, all the people that I talked to today, including the gentleman and the woman who are going to help me, I want to be able to see if I could use my network to help and be of assistance.
Yeah, it's like, know what you're good at, and then have I don't know, the courage, but be smart enough, humble enough to bring in those who can provide more in the areas that aren't your skill set.
That's right. Yeah, and they have value to bring to the table, and they could use a little extra income, and they could use they could use some time that doesn't in front of Netflix.
Right. Send those good vibes and ripples out there into the world, and you never know how those ripples come back.
No, you don't.
It's funny, I think about sales and where you're at today. and I'm going to ask you how you got to where you're at today. And it just so happens this comes off of a conversation my husband and I had with our 16-year-old son over the weekend. He's trying to build his own business.
Nice.
He wants to do car detailing. And I think, his initial thought was, oh, this will be simple, start a business. Well, when you have a dad who runs and started his own business, then it becomes, no, we need to do this, all great learning skills. But as my husband was giving him some advice over the weekend, well, why don't you start calling these people, or why don't you start getting feedback? And he's like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's weird. He's like, that's sales.
Right.
So when I think about sales, my lead up, the reason for that story is sales is, I think for the right person, it's amazing. It can also, if you don't understand it, or if it's not your comfort zone, scary,
be very stressful,
foreboding, ominous.
Yep.
So how'd you get started in sales? Is it something that you knew at an early age? This is what I want to do. I'm really good at it. How did Kristie get to where Kristie's at today? And how early did that epiphany happen or start?
The epiphany didn't happen until much later. The sales part happened a lot earlier. I just didn't connect the two. I grew up in a sales household. So my parents owned a real estate company. My dad was the owner broker. My mom was one of the top real estate agents in the city. But she spent 13 years teaching prior to that, English and Spanish. So and my dad had been a middle manager for the United Telephone Company until going into the real estate business with his brother. So we hadn't really been a sales family up to that point. But once my parents bought that, I got my MBA at the kitchen table because it became all we talked about. Despite the fact my parents worked in the same building, they never actually saw each other during the day, apparently. And so dinner time was when they would debrief. And so we talked about, we knew who the out-of-town buyers were, what they were looking for. I knew every commission check my mother made. I knew when my dad was and wasn't taking a salary to make payroll for his employees. I've always been very transparent about finances in our family. My brother, I have a younger brother. We both got our MBA at the kitchen table, but financial literacy was something that we were taught at a very early age. And so there were really no secrets at our house. And so I make some people uncomfortable because I'm very comfortable talking about money, comfortable talking about what I charge and what I make. And what other people make, and that makes people uncomfortable. But my thought is, if everybody was willing to share, we'd all be making more money now, wouldn't we? And I think particularly this is hard for women. And so growing up in a family where my mother out-earned my father a large percentage of the time that they were running the real estate business for a variety of reasons. And my dad jokingly says sometimes, I remember seeing a paycheck one time that he got and it said 0.00, and I was like horrified. I was like, this is going to affect my wardrobe income, my entertainment income, like what's going on here? And he goes, oh, my paycheck went to pay your mother's taxes. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't understand this quarterly tax thing either. And so I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, your mom makes a lot of money and the government's going to take a large percentage of that. I was like, well, that sounds awful. But, we just, all of this was sort of organic. My first job was waiting tables. And I still say today it was my favorite sales job because you got instant feedback. You would go, the client would leave or the customer would leave, and then you go back to the table and whatever your tip was, that was instant feedback, right? Sometimes it wasn't always fair feedback, but it was instant feedback. And I would say, I would come home, I would, take my apron and bring it home, and then I would dump everything on the family room table. My dad would normally be watching TV when I got home. We would count up the day's haul, and we would grade how it went, and keep track of that. And we used Excel spreadsheet to keep track of all that. And I really I didn't realize at the time that, I got to use, I'm an extrovert, got to use my personality. I love joking with people and playing around with people. Smart, I'm athletic, so I move pretty quickly. Balancing a tray apparently is not for everyone, because I recommend that every teenager wait tables, and they're like, yeah, I'm not coordinated enough for that. I'm like, hostess then, host or hostess. That would be for you. So, but and I said my friends were working, 8 hours a day during the summertime. I was working split shifts and spending my 3 or 4 hours in between at the pool. So I said I got to work on my tan lines as well as make more money than my friends were making. And that's when I didn't really put it together about the ability to control your own income. So I now say that there are jobs with a set income and jobs where you set your income, and it's a choice. And back then, I didn't really make the connection that I was setting my own income by waiting tables. But even within a nice restaurant, not everybody was making the same amount of money. And so the territory you got, the section you were put in, were you doing lunches or dinners? Did they serve alcohol or not? So, I said over time between high school and college, I worked my way up the restaurant food chain. And, I started out working in an ice cream parlor that had, sandwiches and salads for lunch and dinner, no alcohol. Then I moved to a restaurant that served alcohol. Then I got my big break one night when one of the cocktail waitresses in the basement didn't show up, in the sports bar that was in the basement. And I grew up in Kansas. So, this was 3-2 beer. This was no alcohol, on Sundays, not even in the grocery store. So the manager pulls me aside and he's like, I need a cocktail waitress in the basement. I was like, can I? He's like, I just need a cocktail waitress in the basement. I was like, I'm in. I thought, well, this is great. Like, I love sports. This is going to combine all the things that I love, like making money, testosterone filled den, and all the sports that I could ingest when I wasn't running draft beer around the room. But that haul that night, and the apron was really heavy when I left that night. And that's when I figured out that there are also different types of sales jobs, right? I mean, even within waitressing, the difference between what I was making at Swenson's and what I was making at the regular restaurant up top with the wine and the beer and cocktails, and then what I was being able to pull in the basement, big difference. And so that's when I really started to understand a couple things, that I liked instant gratification and feedback. I liked my money I liked my cold hard cash right there, because I think I was making $2.01 was my hourly rate, waiting tables, and then really that really the job you choose matters. Like, you can work a lot of different places, even you can work a lot of different sales jobs. They don't all pay the same. They don't all have the promotion track that you might want. They don't all have the job satisfaction that you want.
So that you do the cocktail waitressing. What'd you do after? Was it, this is what I'm doing from now on? Oh.
Yeah, that was a one and done. Yeah, legally I was not supposed to be in the basement. So even upstairs, I had to have somebody bring alcohol to the table for me. Okay. I could order it, but I couldn't deliver it at the age that I was at. We had very strict liquor laws in Kansas. So no, that was a one and done, but it was the most fun I'd ever had, waiting tables. And I really enjoyed myself waiting tables in general, but down there, and it wasn't for the faint of heart. Lots of screaming, lots of jumping up. You got to be careful with your full tray of beer that you don't end up in somebody's lap.
Right. Be able to dodge.
Yeah, you got to be able to, bob and weave.
Bob and weave. That's great. But I think it's an interesting metaphor or explanation. I waited tables, started out at Steak and Shake when I was too young to deliver alcohol. And then once I got old enough, in an Applebee's, and I think when you talked about finding what you want to do and that lane, there's different lanes in that, like any profession. You can work at a higher end restaurant where, maybe the pressures could be a little bit higher, but you've got alcohol, higher food, you may have fewer. Anyway, there's a lot of different options, and probably a lot of that is knowing yourself. Yeah. And which is really hard to do. I don't think I've really learned myself until 40 something.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, it doesn't always happen in your teens or 20s, that's for sure. But no, I think I've just written a book called Selling Your Way In. And the first section of that book, there are 3 sections. The first section is just that. I think a lot of reason why sales reps struggle to get to the top 10%, as I call it, or be a top performer, is they don't know themselves well enough or the sales industry well enough to pick the right job for them. So like I said, there's 100% commission jobs, there's inside sales jobs, outside sales jobs. There are jobs where you keep what you catch, as I call it. So book of business jobs, such as what you're doing, right? So once you have a client, the goal would be to keep them for the life of that client, and then generations to come, I assume, as well. And there's some jobs where we have hunters, where you're just starting at 0 every month, I call it, and someone else is going to raise the baby for you once you give birth to it. So, but I think I see a lot of people struggle and potentially even lose their jobs because they haven't figured out how to take their skill set and match it to the right job so that they can become a top 10%er.
And I know you've talked about there's different definitions for those types of some of the things you said. Do they want to go and I know the terms, but I'm gonna let you drop the bomb. Do you want to get them? Do you want to take care of them forever?
Yep.
Do you want to do a little bit of both? And can you explain those different types of salespeople?
Yeah, I mean, so hunters are the most in demand because they're the smallest kind of percentage of people. So those are people that want to go out, find the client for the very first time, bring them in, and I call it wipe their hands of them and hand them off to somebody else to raise. And so that's a high prospecting. So there's a lot of cold calling, there's a lot of cold emailing, there's a lot of going to conferences. I say starting at zero, right? And that's harder. And there's at that point, sales in general is a high rejection sport, as I call it, but the highest amount of rejection comes in that area, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's not for everyone. It's a very small percentage of people who are willing to do that job and are good at doing that job. Ironically, women make pretty good hunters. There's a lot more women in the farmer category, which we'll talk mm-hmm. about. But women, for whatever reason, psychologically, there's trust is built more quickly. They're more relationship oriented, and so they're going to be more naturally curious and dig a little deeper. Men tend to want to move a little more quickly through the process, and maybe aren't as intentional about their questioning or don't dig as deeply. So again, very small percentage of people, and we're working really hard. And I say I'm part of a nationwide group of female sales consultants called Women Sales Pros, and we are working to get more women into the hunter position and into sales leadership. It's been a predominantly white male sport. And so we're trying to add women to that. But, for a variety of reasons. One, just potentially it's the highest stress job in sales is being a hunter. You normally have, again, in general, in the world I live in the SaaS software world, $1 million, $1.5 million quota a year. It's a daunting number, but there's a lot of money to be made. And it's normally a 50-50 base salary to variable compensation or commission, as we call it. So you're, again, back to their jobs where you can control your own income. This is absolutely one of those, but you have to be comfortable with only 50% of your income being guaranteed. The other percent, basically on you, right, to bring that in, but also on the company and the job that you pick in order to have the support that you need from your boss, from your marketing department, and making sure that you're picking the right position. Within hunters, there's all kinds, right? There's outside sales reps, 100% commission reps. You can be an inside sales rep, making your money over the phone and over Zoom these days. And then the other kind of group is farmers. So they will raise the baby after you've given birth. So they're not going to hunt for anything. They'll have a book of business, as we call it. This is the world that you live in. So you're growing your book of business all the time, but they can potentially be responsible for upselling, cross-selling, or renewing contract business. So there's an element of sales in there, but I always say, like, when you call a client as a farmer, the phone almost always gets picked up. There's only a 4% connect rate when you're a hunter. So 4 in 100 people will answer the phone when you make a cold call. If you're a farmer, if you're an account manager or a customer success rep, as we would call them, then chances are probably 80+% of the time, if they're at their desk or they're near their cell phone and they see your number come in and your name, they'll answer that because it's a relationship situation and it's a symbiotic relationship. They need you need them. And then the other one is what we call the gatherer, who hunts, and I call keep what you catch. So they fish, but then they get to keep the fish, clean them, and eat them. So the gatherer does both sides of that equation. That's a really hard position. I don't actually believe in gatherers. I don't believe that personality-wise, there are very specific traits for hunters and very specific traits for farmers. It would be very unusual to find a gatherer who was good at both, enjoyed both. Normally, they're going to lean one way or the other. It's kind of the same thing as I also don't believe in leaders being what I'll call player coaches. So having a quota and managing a team. First of all, it's extremely hard to comp those people because they'll lean in at the end of the month wherever they're going to get their most money, right? I wrote a blog post one time and I called it, "If player coach was such a great idea, why isn't the NFL doing it?" So a lot of startup founders, though, see that as their very first hire. They like to hire the VP of sales or director of sales. And I was like, titles are cheap and business cards are cheaper. So like whatever you want to call them is fine, but they shouldn't be doing both, right? Either you really need to bring in the first people that normally get brought in are hunters, right? We need people to go out and find new companies to be brought in. But I think, back to the knowing yourself piece, waiting tables was perfect for me. Again, it wasn't really an intentional. I just liked money. And I knew that I could make a lot more money doing that than babysitting or some other things. And so, I didn't really think about controlling my own income. But as I started to figure out, like, I'm done with the ice cream parlor, like, that was great, like 16-year-old money. But now I'm in college and I don't need 16-year-old money. I need, 18. Now I have beer to buy as opposed to, just needing clothes. Right. And so working my way up, and I don't think I made the connection there, but then I got, the big break as my cocktail waitress night. And I was like, okay, there's a lot of money to be made in the basement. Unfortunately, that didn't fit my demographic at the time, but that really, I was like, and I think now, like, again, to your point about being self-aware in your teens and 20s, not maybe so much, but I take a lot of people through the first section of the book and ask them a lot of questions, right? Like, when do people naturally come to you and ask advice about, right? If you don't really know what your secret weapon is or your swim lane is, if you just think about what is it that people reach out to you and ask questions about, what is it that you enjoy doing? What is it that you seem to have like an easier time doing? I mean, even if you just thought back to school, it was very apparent to me that math and science was not going to be my thing. That social studies and English was totally going to be my thing, and I ended up getting my journalism degree. And then I say never using it, but my writing skills are superior to most, so I use it every day. And that was probably one of the best majors I could have gotten as a result of what I do today and the amount of documentation and writing that I do today. But like, I knew myself, and then ironically, I spent 8 years. We haven't talked about this yet, but my first 8 years out of college, I spent in retail. And actually moved to St. Louis and got here as a result of being a buyer for Famous Barr, being hired and relocated here to St. Louis. So that was 8 years of my life, but that also honed my analytical and math skills, because really retail is not, I said, I'm not setting fashion trends. Nobody invited me to Paris. There were no shows in Paris for me. It was all about assortment. It was all about math. It was all about making sure that the stores didn't run out of white t-shirts or red t-shirts or the hottest denim jean. And so I spent a lot of time really with spreadsheets trying to make sure that I had the right sizes in the right stores at the right time, so that I didn't have to take markdowns and spend, because anytime if I had a pool of, let's say, $1 million to spend over the year, every time I had a markdown that dinged me, that came out of my buying budget, that came out of my checkbook. And so, it was more important to make sure that you didn't run out or to see a trend. We got trend reports every Monday, and an assistant buyer. So the first thing the assistant buyer spent the entire 4 hours of their first morning on Monday, figuring out what had sold in the last week, what do we need, and then letting the buyer know so that we can go and ask for reorders, making deals. So that really honed a different side. I really would probably not have had the negotiation skills that I have today if I hadn't done that job first. But I thought it was ironic. I got my journalism degree, and then the only two companies that wanted to hire me were the Jones Store Company out of Kansas City and Kmart. And I was like, how did this happen? And again, I think part of it was work ethic. I had clearly shown work ethic, because again, as you've already pointed out, waiting tables, not also for the faint of heart. You have to be, that's again, the hours were great. They were short shifts, but you worked really hard during those short shifts. And it was, when a game was on. There was no, smoke break. The people who were, the waiters and the waitresses I worked with that were smokers. It was really hard, those 3 hours that you never got to step out back to smoke. But yeah, there was no downtime, right? You were going from the jump. And I think that work ethic, did me right. But I did not like corporate America. I got disenchanted with it pretty quickly, and I bought for some higher end brands within what's now Macy's. It was Famous Barr, but what's now Macy's, and I got tired of being in New York. And we went 10 times a year, once a month, and I'm sitting in rooms with even sometimes my president, the president, my general merchandise manager, my divisional merchandise manager, myself. In a lot of cases, I bought like Liz Claiborne and Chouse and Tommy Hilfiger. So the Missy buyer, the petite buyer, the women's buyer, all in the room. And I just sort of felt like a secretary for a while, like taking notes and wasn't really making decisions. And it was pretty political. I think I really liked about it is I saw a lot of female mentors and females in that. There's a lot of females in that space. My very first store manager, Miss Fitzgerald, was a 5-inch heel wearing, chain smoking, potty mouth store manager, and she was probably the best thing I could have ever had coming out of college. I mean, she was just intimidating and like all get out. But I mean, she was a force to be reckoned with. When she was on the floor, as we would call it, not in her office, you knew. Like you could hear her coming a mile away. With her 5-inch heels on. She was close to 6 foot tall or taller, and short black hair, and she was a presence. And I think that was a really great place for me to start, because there were a lot of women, and I worked for a lot of women as in the divisional merchandise manager. My general managers were all white men, but I got an opportunity to work with a lot of women, a lot of really strong women, really smart women, and even going to New York. A lot of the vendors were female, have female led or had a lot of females in them that we were negotiating with. So I think I had a different kind of even upbringing, with my mother out earning my father from time to time. Waiting tables was predominantly a female industry. And then going into retail, a lot of women in retail as well. So I had a lot of really great role models. So I think I grew up differently than other people and had opportunities to see different things based on just, again, don't know that was conscious decisions I was making, but I one way or the other put myself in position to interact with a lot of very smart and strong women.
And I think, we're in 2023. It's more normal to see women in more places, getting to be more normal, where maybe the wife out-earns the husband. But if we're talking, even as long as 10, 15 years ago, still not very normal, or to see that mentor. So what do you think it was about Miss Fitzgerald, or is there like a certain story you remember where you were like, wow, this lady has it. I want to be like her. I
think it was just her story. She never got a college degree. She worked her way up, and I think there were 8 stores at the time. So 7 in Kansas City and the 1 in Topeka that I was working in. And she was the only woman store manager in the Jones Store Company, and one of very few women within the mercantile group. So the mercantile family was privately owned, had stores in other parts of the country. And so she started out as a sales associate. She worked her way up. She didn't have a college degree. She learned everything, like on the job training, I called it. And it was always intimidating. The mercantile family would come and visit X number of times a year. And that was an all hands on deck, 24 hours in the store, cleaning and buffing and doing and folding and fluffing and all of those things. But she never seemed ruffled. And I thought, you're in a room. We had a secret locked room. Every store did, that was part of the mercantile group, where we kept all of the numbers on the big board, if you will, like a big wipe off board, and all the numbers were there. But it was a locked room, and we held our executive meetings in there. Every store did. But when the executives came, we spent all of our time mostly talking to them in that room. And then in corporate headquarters, they also had a locked room that had all of the numbers on it, but also had every single manager in the company ranked in a pyramid. And so when I went to corporate, we got to go to corporate twice a year to do training. And they would take you into the secret room. They wouldn't show you everything. They wouldn't show you where you're ranked or things like that, but you knew you were being ranked. And so I thought, how confident she had to be in a situation like that. And, honestly, she never left the Topeka store. She never got promoted to a Kansas City store. And I don't think she really wanted to, in fairness. I think she built her life in Topeka and she really liked that. But she was tough as nails, but she was also very compassionate. I always felt like I could walk, she was intimidating, but not unapproachable. So I guess the intimidating part really came from just the respect that you would have for her. So there was a high amount of respect, but her door was always open and you were always welcome. And she was, she pushed you to be better. She made you better. And I think from that point forward, I always looked for people to work for that I thought would make me better. Ironically, my first, this is my sad St. Louis story, because when I was interviewed in Kansas City for a position in St. Louis, for those of you who are local, the first job I had before going to the buying office was they wanted me to help close down and reopen the West County store and the Chesterfield store. So if you're old enough and you've been here long enough, you know that I called it the spaceship at West County. We shut that store down, and then the store that you know today, I was part of building that store out. And we did the same thing at the Chesterfield store, tore down the old store and rebuilt the new one. And I took the job because I'd interviewed with a woman named Pam, who was running the West County store, and she was the store manager. And I was like, this is awesome. Another really strong, smart female. So excited to work for her. And this was a big deal for me. I was leaving I'd grown up in Topeka for the most part. And I was leaving behind my boyfriend at the time, who we were living together, my family, all of the things that I knew, and moving to a city where I didn't really know anybody for the most part, with just a job that I felt confident in. I felt like this was my next good step change, as I call it, in my career path. And I show up on day one, like pumped up and so excited. And I show up to the employee entrance door, and there's a big poster on it that says, "Welcome, store manager Greg Condon." And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, I didn't know this man. I had not met him, and I wanted to work for Pam. Pam had been promoted to the Belleville store. And here I am, and I took a job for a person. And I did it one other time in my career, and I'll tell you that story if we get to that point. But I'm very careful about telling people, like, got to be careful about taking a job because of a person, because I thought she was totally going to make me better. And she would have made me better. She was still very well thought of within Famous Barr and store managers, and she did have a great career with the store, but she didn't make me better. She didn't get a chance to make me better, and that was just a huge disappointment. I remember I had a little apartment in Baldwin behind the Elko car dealership, and I remember coming home like 2 or 3 weeks in and just sitting on the floor and sobbing. First off, I had ordered that Emo's pizza that everybody was raving about and thought I'd gotten ripped off. I was like, what is this? I literally called the company. I called the store. I was like, I think I got the wrong pizza. I'm like, this is awful. And I didn't understand the propelled thing. I didn't understand. I said, just sent me a tortilla with shitty cheese on it. I don't know what is going on here. But I sat on the floor and just cried. I was like, what have I done? Like, I thought I'd made a huge mistake. Because I had all these dreams that she was gonna was gonna take me under she was gonna take me under her wing and make me this awesome like female executive, and then I got the white man.
How did that end up? How long were you there?
It didn't end up well for Greg. He didn't stay very long. And so I was it worked out better than I thought it had worked out, only because there was a core group of us that had been literally pulled together. I was part of a kind of an exclusive group. They had taken the best of the best department managers from all over the city, pulled them together to shut down and reopen West County. And then they were like, now you can go to the buying office. I was like, great, here we go. And I remember I was on vacation with my family at my uncle's place in Arizona when the regional manager, Marty, reached out to me and asked if he could have a phone call. And I was like, sure. And my uncle's like, that's pretty cool. Like, the regional manager's calling you on vacation. It must be really important. And I was like, yeah, or that kid. I was like, I don't know that I'm feeling as good about it as you are. And it turns out he says, hey, listen, like, we're going to take a core group of you who opened the West County store, and we'd like you to do it again at the Chesterfield store. I mean, these were really, really hard, long days. The only plus of doing this job was you got to do it in jeans. And because back then we were still wearing nylons and heels to work in the store. And so you got to wear your tennis shoes and your jeans. That was the only benefit as far as I could tell, because these were awfully long days. And I was like, and he's like, and I was like, oh, I was really like I literally had moved to St. Louis because I wanted to be in the buying office. I wasn't getting that chance in the Jones Store Company. And he goes, well, I do have an assistant buying position open. And I was like, okay. And he's like, it's in the silverware department, like silverware, plates. And I was like, okay, that was like the no promotion. I was like, okay. So I said, fine, one more time, but not anymore, one more time. So we, about 80% of us who'd done the West County did the Chesterfield store, and we were a tight group at that point, because you live through something like that, like it becomes family. So I did it one more time, and then I got to go down, and then they let me buy juniors. So I was like, that's great. Swimsuit and denim and dresses. I was like, this is perfect. But yeah, it was a really interesting experience. And although I was devastated and I felt very lonely and in a city, I just was like, what have I done? I've left everybody who loves me and that I know back in Kansas. But, I'd never lived alone, and I needed to do that, right? I needed to be out on my own. I needed to live alone. I hadn't done that yet. And I needed to see a different experience and live in a different city and meet different people. So although I didn't ultimately choose that as my profession, I gained a lot of skills. I mean, working with the public, there was just a lot of pluses to growing up in the retail world.
And it sounds like by kind of, I don't know, just taking one for the team and helping open that Chesterfield store, it allowed you to then, if you had been stuck in the silverware,
yeah, I would not have been happy. I would not have been happy in hardware.
Right.
No. Yeah, no. And I got into the ready to wear area. I loved juniors was so fast. I mean, trends come and go, right? So like, that's why I said, like, every Monday that assistant buyer was really digging through things and trying to rebuy, the swimsuit season's only so long anyway. And when you almost sell out of something in the first week or two, like, you got to find more of that. You got to find it quickly. And most of that's coming from China. So I call it the slow boat from China. It takes a while to get here. So yeah, you got it was the pace I needed. I think that was one of the other things I learned about retail, especially in the junior department. The pace was frenzied. And that's what I love about the startup world, right? There's a sense of urgency. Those VCs want their money back. You're working with really smart people, but the pace is frenzied. And that fits my personality. Back to choosing jobs that fit you and fit your personality.
Do you have a story from those buying days where you felt like you saw the trend, you really knocked it out of the park? Or was there a time when, ooh, we missed that? Or a story for each? Yeah.
Or both. Yeah, I remember a denim short summer when Mudd, M-U-D-D, Mudd jeans and shorts were all the rage. And I said, Marty from Mudd. Because Marty, when I would go to Marty's showroom, Marty would be there with his putter and he has little fake green, and he would be working on his putts. As we're negotiating, he's not really lifting his head. He's still working on his putter, whatever. And so, yeah, I remember literally coming in on a Monday and my system buyer's like, oh my gosh, we are almost out of, 736 denim shorts. And I was like, that's not possible. I bought a lot of those. They're like, yeah, we're almost out. So I got on the phone right away. I was like, Marty, I gotta have more denim. He goes, Kristie, I don't know, slow boat from China. And I'm like, oh my gosh, come on, Marty. And I mean, I kept haggling with him. And finally he's like, everybody needs the short. What am I going to do? And I'm like, you're going to put me at the top of the list. What is it going to take? And everything. And I mean, it was all about money, right? So even in this business, if you were paying, let's say $8.72 for the short and reselling it at $29.99, if I'm willing to pay $9.25 for the short and somebody else is not willing to pay that, I can go to the top of the list. So, really honed my negotiation skills. I have the same stories about Marty in reverse, right? Calling Marty after the jeans sell in the wintertime, and he's like, it's like that. He goes, that denim lot is gone. He's like, there is just this no more to make denim jeans out of. And, so that you had to react very quickly. And it is hard. Sometimes it's hard to walk into a showroom. You think what looks good in the showroom is going to play. And then it plays differently across the country as well. And even we had, Carbondale, we had a store. We had, stores on, in East St. Louis. We had stores in in Metro St. Louis. So you had to really know your demographic. Because certain things were going to play differently in different stores, even different colors are going to play differently, different styles are going to play differently. And so really understanding that made a big difference too. But yeah, sometimes I can't tell you how many times I walked into the showroom, I'm like, that is totally a bestseller. And then I'm marking that thing down 8 weeks later. I was like, oh my gosh, this was awful. It was just awful. And some things just didn't fit right? Sometimes they looked great. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the fabric everything about it was right except the fit. And you can't fix fit.
Especially probably in teens.
Yeah. No, it had to fit just right.
Right.
For the teenagers. Yes, it did.
It's hard enough being an older woman and figuring that out. But that teen transition years.
Yes. If they don't like it, they won't wear it.
Right. And it doesn't matter, it's not like their mom who can go at 2 or 4, buy them and they'll wear whatever. Yeah. They'll wear pajamas to the grocery store.
They will.
They don't care. It's their favorite Buzz Lightyear pajamas or princess pajamas.
That's right. Yeah.
So they get to that certain age and mom may think it looks cool and bought it, but if they don't.
Some things are just not worth the fight.
Right. That's funny. So thinking about getting out of kind of retail, what was the next phase for you? Or was it still in retail, but a different kind of, industry?
Yeah, no, I got out big time. I made the decision. There were some things going on that would border on the unethical. And so I knew it was time to go. And Famous Barr soon became Macy's at that, but there were some financial things going on and there were some things that were happening that I knew were not above board. And so I knew it was time to go. So I think the other thing that I really do stress in the book is, you have to know your own value system and in where that lies for you. And you don't have to compromise that. You shouldn't compromise that. You don't have to compromise that. There are jobs out there where you don't have to compromise, your character, your integrity, or your value system. And so I decided, I made an interesting decision, and I'm not sure where this came from, but I told people this at the time. They kind of looked at me funny, but I said, I'm not looking for a job. I'm looking for a company. And I think the reason was because I've been disappointed by the current company. And so I went out saying, I think I have a lot of skills and I can help a lot of different types of companies, but at the company itself and the values of that company were really important to me at that time. And so I went and talked to a lot. Again, I didn't grow up in St. Louis. That was a huge disadvantage, right? I did not go to high school here. So I had to rely on those who did. And my husband at the time was a private baseball instructor, and he had a lot of clients who owned their own businesses. He was coaching kids whose parents owned businesses. And so I said to him, I'm like, I need a list of all of the, the clients that you're closest to and what they do and whatever. And so I started to reach out to some of those people and introduce myself. And I ran across a guy who I'd spent some time socially with, he and his wife. My husband was coaching his son. And I met him for lunch, and back in the day, this was when you had the really nice parchment, your resume on the really nice parchment paper. So I had my portfolio, and I had like my 20 copies of my resume, and he was entrenched in the St. Louis golf world. So I told him that I was looking, I said, here are all the skills I have, and I'm looking for a smaller company. So I think I went back to my roots. I think that growing up in a small business with my parents, like I liked that feel. Like even growing up, we were office rats, my brother and me. And, we knew all the agents, and we knew, my dad's assistant, and we knew the marketing person and all of those type of things. And so I think I really missed that feel. So I knew I wanted a smaller company. And so I gave my resume to this gentleman, Dean Pichet, and gave him all the resumes. I'm like, hand these all, while you're golfing, I'm sure you guys are talking shop. Like, I'm a valuable member of somebody's team in the future. I hand him my resumes. And so a couple weeks later, I, doubled back and did my follow-up, and I said, so how'd it go? And he's like, we should have lunch again. And so we had lunch again. He said, so I'm looking for an HR manager, which I thought was hilarious. I was like, oh, you don't know me well enough yet, clearly, because that is an awful idea. I said, I will either fire everybody or everybody will quit. I said, that's not really my personality. Like, I don't like the crying with Kristie in my office because somebody upset you is probably not what you want me to be doing. This is not going to go well for you. I don't even own Kleenex.
I was going to ask you, why did you say, no, this would never work? But it sounds like you just
you got, again, know yourself,
right.
Pick the right jobs. And I knew that I was, my compassion level was a little lower at that point. I was just 30. And so I was kind of on the be brief, be bright, be gone program. I was like, we were working at a feverish pace in retail, and there's just not a time to stop and, give hugs and wipe tears. And so he was like, okay. So I was like, no, seriously, like, you still have those resumes. Like, I need you to give those out at the golf course. Like these are the people I want to work for, the small business owners that you do golf with. And so 2 or 3 weeks later, he calls again. He's like, let's have lunch again. I was like, okay, cool. I was like, great. Now he's got like connections for me. He's going to put me in touch with people. And he's like, okay, so my partner and I have parted ways, and I need somebody who has some business acumen to come in and help me with business. And I was like, well, what are you proposing? Because this HR thing is, I already told you no on that. He's like, I don't know, but I think you can help. He's like, I've been hiring a lot of kids out of college, and they're in their early to mid 20s, and I just need somebody who's got a little more business experience to help. So we talked multiple times over the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I literally took a leap of faith. I had no job title. I did not know them that well. We had done social things, baseball games and dinners with he and his wife. And I thought that, and again, I felt good about the value system there, the quality of the people that I was going to be working for. But I didn't know anything. We didn't even call it SaaS back then, software as a solution. It was subscription model. I'm so old that we didn't even call it SaaS. And it was e-learning. And I was like, and he had been in the banking industry, actually. He had a company in St. Louis called Bankers Training. And he had sold bank training, compliance training to banks all over the country, had sold that business and made a little bit of money, and decided to expand and do e-learning. It was very new on the scene, right? In fact, it was so new that we weren't doing e-learning yet. We were literally shipping VHS tapes across the country. The UPS man came twice a day. Came in the morning to drop stuff off and in the afternoon to pick stuff up. And you had a membership. So companies would buy training VHS tapes. It was a lending library. So if you had 3 credits, then you got to have 3 videos out at a time. And again, lots of the people and listeners are going to be like, I don't even know what she's talking about. VHS
was the
tapes.
Netflix and the Red Box and all that
No.
before that, where Netflix or somewhere you could order DVDs to be sent to your home.
Yeah, but we weren't even doing DVDs. We were doing VHS. Then we got into DVDs, which gave us a lot more space in the office because the DVD library or the VHS library was very bulky. The DVD library, we could have a lot of DVDs in a very small space. And then we flew into e-learning. But I went in there and I remember the first week or two, I just followed him around like a puppy. He just took me to every meeting in the office, out of the office or whatever. I did not have a clue. His wife had been doing the benefits and payroll. And about 4 weeks in, she came in with all of these 3-ring binder manuals and set them on my desk. And I was like, hey, what's this? She's like, this is all the information you're going to need to know because I'm going to have you taken over benefits. I was like, oh my gosh. Then I was like, I thought we talked about this HR thing, that this probably wasn't my thing. She's like, no, not HR benefits. I was like, oh God. And so I spent the next 10 years helping him grow that business from a little under $2 million to almost $10 million. About a year in, I took over most of the sales team. I started by hiring some people and training some people. I had no clue what I was doing. I started a sales manager roundtable group. So again, self-awareness is important. I knew I didn't know what I didn't know, and I had to figure out a way to do that. And so I had met a recruiter friend, Steve Ecker, here in town, and I called him and I said, I need all of the sales leaders that you work with in small businesses, like businesses under $5 million, like mom and pop shops or privately owned companies in St. Louis. So he gave me a list, and I brought these people together. I brought about 8 of them together at my office and said, here's my vision. I'm like, you may not have a network of other people like us, but we're doing things for the first time, or we're coming across challenges, and I want to meet once a month, and I want everybody to bring their problems to the table. I want us to solve them as a group, and I want us to do this regularly, 12 times a year, if not more. And everybody's like, yeah, that sounds great. And so I think I started with a core group of about 6 or 7, most of whom I'm still in contact with today. And we covered everything from first maternity leave. Like somebody showed up and says, I have my first pregnant salesperson. And I was like, oh God, I didn't have that yet. And we're like, what are we going to do? Like, does that person still have a quota while they're off? Mm-hmm. What if something sells while they're not working? Do we pay them commission or not? Like, how long do we give them? Like not even outside of legally, like what if they want 3 months off? We talked about compensation plans. We did a strategic planning session at the end of every year. And so I built my own circle, my tribe of people just like me who were running across the problems just like me. And I just wasn't equipped to solve them. So over time, at some point, I took over the entire revenue responsibility. So I had the hunters and the farmers. We didn't have gatherers. And so I took over the entire sales team and had 100% revenue responsibility. And that was really the best experience. Like I knew I wanted something small. I said I wanted to sit at the Knights of the Round Table, right? I wanted my voice to be heard. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to be one of 12 people sitting in Tommy Hilfiger's, showroom in New York, just taking notes while other people negotiated stuff for me. Like I wanted to be on the front line. I kind of grown up that way and saw what that was about. And really I said, if the copier jammed, I know copiers, it's hilarious to talk about these things, isn't it? The copier jammed, that was me. If we ran out of Post-its, that was me. If you weren't sure, what your deduction was or you had benefits questions, that was me. And if you wanted to help close that, first $100,000 deal, that was me too. So I wore a lot of hats, kept me busy, and I loved every minute of it. And I really, I became the sales leader that I am today. I attribute everything back to Dean Pache and his family because he gave me a shot. I thought I was taking the risk, but then I figured out later that he'd actually taken a really big risk, that he took a bigger risk on me than I probably took on him. But I think he had seen what I had done and where I had been. And again, I think the fact that he really loved my husband helped as well. And so it all worked out. And even today, I still attribute where I am today. So I wouldn't be running my own business without Dean Pache either. After doing that for 10 years, I went and worked for another company where I got laid off 18 months in. We got acquired. It was a VC. It was my first VC-backed company, so I got the VC-backed bug. But it was on the east side. It was a company called Network Solutions. You know them today as web.com. Because web.com out of Florida bought them, and I was employee number 1 let go. And it was terrifying. I had never been through this before. And I thought, what am I going to do? And, I reached out to my network and I subsequently got some other jobs. And then I got laid off a second time. I had a company, the department that I was running was under the sales umbrella, and they wanted to move it to under the marketing umbrella, which happens from time to time, except the marketing department was out of Phoenix, Arizona. And so my boss, the VP of sales came in and told me that they were going to disband my department and rebuild it in Phoenix. And that I was going to, if I would stay on for 3 months, they would give me 3 months severance. And so that was this, I knew what to prepare for the second time around. The first time around was an emotional roller coaster. The second time around wasn't great because I loved that job and I knew that company was going to be successful, but I knew how to handle that situation, that layoff. So they, good to their word, they paid me to stay around for 3 months as they rebuilt the team. And so most of my employees that we absorbed into the company somewhere, but some of them I had to let go, which was also hard. And so I started to reach out to my network to look for my next VP of sales gig. And I started with Dean Pache because, again, grew up in St. Louis, business owner, golfer. I thought, here we go again. Here we go. I'm going to need your network again. And ironically, he put me in touch with 3, as a result of him, I started my consultancy business, not intentionally, but the two people he put me in touch with, and one that had been a partner of ours when I had worked for him previously. All the universe conspired to bring all of this together for me. He introduced me to a husband and wife team who was looking for a VP of sales. He introduced me to a general manager at Cultivation Capital, the number one VC in Missouri here in town, and David Friedman with Service Skills, who was a customer service e-learning company here in town. He introduced me to these people. I started conversations with them, and then David reached out unknowingly that I was in the position that I was in, and we had lunch. And as it turns out, like, he needed help, and I thought, well, I'll come in and help you. He needed some help figuring out some compensation situations. I said, well, I can make this my side hustle. I got some time. But then I told him what was going on, and he was like, interesting. And then I was interviewing with the husband and wife team for their VP of sales position. That was going pretty well. When the general manager that I'd had breakfast with that day, John True, reached out to me, and he said, hey, we just invested in a cybersecurity company, founder-led sales, and the founder has no idea like where to start to build out the sales team. Would you have coffee? I was like, of course. And my motto is I have 30 minutes for everyone. So I ended up giving him 90 minutes. But he took all these notes. Brian was his name. And he took all these notes, and he was like engaged and asked the right questions. And I was like, I felt important. I was like, somebody's coming to me for advice about how to build out their sales team. Like, this is really cool. And at the end of the thing, he says, this has been amazing. And he's looking all his notes over, and he goes, I have no confidence that I can do any of the things that you just said. And I was like, oh, I was like disappointed. I was like, oh, I thought I was like really specific. And yeah, like, I thought I'd given you really good advice. And he said, who can help me do this? Do you know somebody? And I said, before I even thought about it, I was like, I can help you. And I was still employed during my 3-month stint of transition. And he's like, well, I thought you were employed. I'm like, sort of, and I knew they wanted me to show up every day, and they knew that I was going to be interviewing. So I helped him hire his first 2 sales reps and then build out some processes. And then he said, then I was like, okay, like, I got you an SDR and I got you an AE, and I put the process together, and I got the marketing guy all set up and who was already there. And I said, so like, like, it's been great. He's like, where do you think you're going? And I was like, well, like, I thought I was going to go get a real job. And he was like, no, he's like, I need you to stay on. I need you to lead the sales team. And I was like, oh, fractional sales leadership was something I didn't even really know existed. And I was like, well, how does this work? And he's like, well, can you give me 10 hours a week? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. And so I was helping David out too, doing some training with his team. And I told him my exciting news. And he's like, perfect. He's like, this is what you should be doing. He's like, I'll take you fractionally too. And I was like, oh, okay. And he goes, I want at least 10 hours a week, but as you're building your business out, I will pay you and I will take up to 30 hours a week. I was like, you're going to be my business sugar daddy. And he was. That's what I call it. I was like, you're my business sugar daddy. I'm like, this is awesome. And then I went back to the husband and wife team because I was like, okay, so the universe, I'd always said to people, anybody who would talk, I'd watch a lot of hard things happen with my family. My dad had bypass surgery at 53, and I thought, despite the 2-pack a day smoking, the stress of the job, I thought was a contributing factor to that situation. We'd had an office fire. We'd had half of our real estate office leave and open up a competing office, a Remax office. We were with Coldwell Banker, Century 21 at the time. And I'd just seen a lot of, and my dad's secretary had stolen from us. So I'd seen I had seen the good and the bad of owning your own business. I'd seen the income situation. When real estate's good, everybody's happy. When real estate's bad, ain't nobody happy. But we'd had a lot of other weird things happen so I'd always said to anybody who would listen, like, yeah, I'm never going to own my own business. Like, I'd watched it kind of like destroy my dad's health and add, take some years away from his life. But I thought, there's something definitely going on here that I probably shouldn't ignore. It feels like the universe is definitely speaking to me. And everything had been connected back to Dean, who had taken the first chance on me when I'd left retail to begin with. So I thought everything seemed like it was happening the way it should happen. So I went back to the husband and wife team and said, hey, listen, like, I think I'm going to do this. And I think you should be a client. Like, you have 2 account executives and 1 SDR. And I don't think you need a full-time VP of sales. And you're probably not going to want to pay me what I want to be paid. You should hire me as a fractional sales leader too. And they were like, no, thanks. Not going to do that. And I said, okay. So parted ways as friends. And then a week later, the husband called and said, hey, so we've been working with a consultant locally. And I was like, oh, they hadn't disclosed this previously. And I was like, okay. And he goes, would you have, breakfast or lunch with this individual? And I was like, well, sure. Who's your consultant? And they were like, Mike Weinberg. And I was like, the Mike Weinberg? And they're like, yeah. And I go, the guy who's written the books. And they're like, yeah. And I was like, huh. So I kind of thought they were small potatoes for him. I was like, wow, you're like working with one of the like most successful like sales consultants in the country. Like, this is pretty impressive. So I met Mike for breakfast, and we had, like, he said, you were siblings from another mother. We believed in still picking up the phone to make sales calls, that we couldn't sell anything over email. Like, we had a lot of similar philosophical thoughts around sales. And at the end of the breakfast, he's like, okay, this is totally what should be happening. Like, I'm going to make this happen. And I said, no, I don't think, he doesn't seem like he really wants a fractional sales leader. He goes, yeah, leave it up to me. I'll take care of it. And 2 days later, they called and said, why don't you come in and let's work out the details. So he did. And then Mike mentored me for the first year, and gave me his contracts, told me how to charge, pumped me up, gave me confidence to charge more than I was ever going to be charging. I'm just new at this. I'm not like you. Like, I haven't been doing this forever. And he goes, you've been a sales leader for 16 years. Like, you've just not been doing consultancy for 16 years. So all of that came together. And again, Dean introduced me to people that really changed my life, but going back to, I still credit him. I took him a really nice bottle of wine and said, thank you so much, because really it was his connections and really his confidence in me, back in 2000 when I left retail. And like I said, at the time, I thought I was taking the risk, but now I know that he was taking the risk. So everything I say, one of the things I talk about in the book is when the universe speaks, listen. And I think you have to be open to that. Your husband and I have some similar outside interests, if you will, where we do believe in opening ourselves up to new experiences and making sure that that you can hear when people are talking or when things are happening, and that self-awareness and just being open to seeing things. I had really told anybody who had asked that I would never own my own business. But I had to admit that something weird was happening. And when David said I'll fund you, basically, I'll support you financially until you get up off the ground, which, by the way, he actually didn't have to support me for that long. Because, before I ever left that company, my 3-month stint, I had enough clients to support myself, and clients came and went. And and he helped out the first year financially by me working more hours for him when I had some downtime. But yeah, and I really attribute this. I tell people, I said, I want to be clear about when I tell my story. A lot of people are because a lot of people who start their own business don't have the story that I have, and there's no hustle struggle for me. Mm-hmm. But I say to people, I go, but I'm not lucky. I did the right things by people all along, and then the right things happened to me. So I said I always had 30 minutes for everybody. I took the phone call that other people wouldn't take. I took the phone call from strangers when somebody when a friend said, could you talk to my friend who thinks they want to go into sales, or can you, even my girlfriends would send me their Dear John breakup email or breakup text messages and to review and condense down, because before 4 pages of breakup email, I'm like, that's a guy. They're not going to read. They're never going to get past the first page. We're going to have to put it all into one page. And so I do believe in that, right? I believe that what you put out into the universe and what you give will come back to you. And in my case, I think it came back tenfold. And I still feel like I lead a blessed life today. But I continue to find 30 minutes for people. I keep saying to people, maybe I'll be busy enough one day I only have 15 minutes for you, but unfortunately still I have further 30 minutes for you.
Well, and it's like your hustle started 15, 20 years before that opportunity presented itself.
That's right.
Like we talked earlier, you did the St. Louis store and you said, fine, okay, the Chesterfield store. Well, that was a hustle.
Yep.
That was, again, your network, doing the right things, building your name and what you stand for. So there was hustle, just maybe not what the normal definition of hustle is. Oh, I started this job here. I started the hustle. And how long? Well, you started it, 2-3 jobs ago.
No, that's a good point.
Point.
You're right. Yeah. I did. Yeah. I mean, when people ask for things, I was likely to say yes. Even if it wasn't what I didn't think was in my best interest at the time, or what I was desirable at the time.
Which can be a pitfall too, I think, if you don't learn at some point to say no.
That's correct.
You have to be smart and strategic about it. And maybe it's later in life that you do that, but there is almost a change or shift that you have to make at some point. Yes. If you say yes too many times, then you are spreading yourself too thin.
Yeah, the most successful people say no more than they say yes. And then Brene Brown taught me how to say no in a way that would be comfortable for me and for other people. So I do think, and I've gotten better about that. I still have a harder time saying no professionally to things, But I used to be I was a professional over planner and over scheduler, and I was miserable. And I was going all the time. And, I was never one to turn down a good happy hour, and was never, one to turn down a good walk in Queenie Park. But I was exhausted. And now I have a better balance around my self-care and my needs, and being able just to say, like, I wish I could, but I can't.
What is it that Brene Brown said or taught you how to do it that made it better or easier?
Yeah, and I think it was just, I used that phrase from her. Like, I wish I could, I wish I could help out. Please ask me, she's like, she goes, it's all about timing, right? Like, they could ask the same thing 2 different months apart, and one will be yes and one will be no. It depends on what else is going on in your world. So, I really wish, Cynthia, that I could help you out. Unfortunately, now is just not the best time for me, but please ask me again, because it is something that I'm interested in helping with.
It's a great, easy tip.
Yep.
For anybody listening to start using.
Yeah, lots of good tips from Brene Brown. You can't go wrong there.
Well, and when you said listening to the universe, you put yourself out there and you have to listen. So by putting myself out there over the last few years, I've had somebody we talked about, Sarah Stock, love her.
Yep.
She sent me a book. And it was one of Oprah's books, compilations of interviews and statements from others. I don't know who said this, but it was literally, life will whisper to you. So this happened in my life personally, at least once, one major time I can think of. But life will whisper to you, and it will keep whispering. And if you don't listen, eventually it will shake the crap out of you to make you listen. It will force you.
Yeah.
So to keep your mind and your heart and your spirit open to listen, and potentially, kind of like you did, I'm never going to own my own business, well, maybe you have to shift and say,
the joke was on me.
Yeah.
Yep, the universe thought that was very funny when I repeatedly said that out loud over and over and over again.
Don't be afraid to, if it feels right, go back on what you may have said at one point, if it's right for you.
Yeah, that's right. It's okay to change your mind. And again, I'm doing it a certain way, right? Like, I think some of the lessons I did learn growing up, like, I've chosen not to have employees. I've chosen to do 1099s, right? I've chosen to do contract workers for a reason, probably, because I've seen some other things happen. So, but you can, again, like, I'm doing it the way I'm comfortable doing it.
Right. What works for you, what works for your business, and really what works for your clients.
Yes.
Continues to add benefits in those ways.
Agreed.
Something you had written about was that you had a 10-month employment mistake.
I did.
And I know we talked about, and maybe this is related, because I also want to go back and ask about that first time you said you got laid off, like what you learned from that, and just kind of how it happened, the story behind it. Are those related? Are these two different situations?
Let me think about that. Yes, they are related, because I did yes, they are related. So the first one I got laid off, the 10-month stint was the next job after that. So I'd fallen in, like, I got the VC-backed bug. So the company, Network Solutions, that I was working for, that I was employee number 1 laid off at, was VC-backed. So when I went out to search for a job, I was like, I want fast-paced, smart people, VC-backed, all of that sounded great. And so I chose a company here locally that I will not name, but I will tell you that they sold holistic and natural pet food. But they were VC-backed. One of the boxes I hadn't checked on my resume yet was managing an international team. And I had wanted to work for a company when I was in the e-learning space. And I applied for a job for EMEA. And I didn't get the job because I didn't have any international sales leadership experience. So they were going to let me run Canada. And I was like, okay, so, like, I guess it's sort of international experience. I'm like, it is a different country. It happens to be on our continent, but okay, I'll be able to check the box. So I was going to run the inside sales team. I was going to run the Canadian team. It was going to be VC backed. The CEO and the COO at the time I called them guns for hire. They had just turned around Breyer's ice cream. Apparently Breyer's ice cream had been in trouble at one point. Who knew?
How could ice cream
I know, but apparently maybe they weren't profitable, but so they had just come from their turnaround gig at Breyer's ice cream. And so I was like, this is great. Female sales leader. I was like, check the female sales leader box again. Here we go. And I got in there and I was like, it took me about 4 weeks to do the, like, 4 to 6 weeks to do the what have I gotten myself into thing. And I was like, dog and cat food, not sexy. Requires FDA approval. I was also in charge of distribution, like, of communicating distribution situations. So I was on the ops. I moonlighted on the ops team. So when we ran out of ingredients, because this was all like These were all specialty ingredients. And if you were missing one ingredient, then that shut production down. And then you had to call the distributors and say like, hey, I'm not shipping that, chicken dog food because the barley didn't come in or whatever. It was awful. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so not sexy. I had no idea. It was a distribution model. I didn't really fully understand that at the time. I'd never dealt with that anymore. It was CPG. And I was just miserable. And so about 4 months in, I was like, this was a mistake. And so the other thing I say to people is, again, self-awareness is critical. I knew I needed to get back into software. Like I didn't realize, I thought it checked all these boxes. And so I was like, I'm going to do this and it's going to be great. Again, the people were as smart as I thought that they were. They were dedicated. The product was high end quality. Everybody was good. People were good, but the model didn't work for me. And I was just like, I just can't get passionate about holistic dog and cat food. Although I owned a dog and fed the dog that dog food until she died. And that was good. That was high quality food. So I started looking for a job at about the 4 to 5 month mark. And then, then got out of that and rolled into, back to SaaS world. So it wasn't the job that ended up losing the second job I lost my job from. But I rolled out of that experience. And I think part of that, so the lessons learned from losing my job, it really does ding your self-esteem. I found that I took, my brother has a lake house down in southern Missouri at Lake Stockton. And I was already scheduled to go for the weekend. I walked in, so we had been bought by another, the company Network Solutions had been bought by the web.com friends. And I drove all the way from Wildwood, Missouri to Belleville to go to work. And I walked in, midweek, and my boss had put time on the calendar for first thing that morning, but it happened that night before and I hadn't seen it. And so I was in exec row, it was my office, then the VP of HR, and then I worked for the COO. And I literally didn't see it until I got in, and I was already late for the meeting because it was supposed to start at 8 and I was in at 8:10. And so I flew into his office, and the VP of HR was there as well, a woman. And again, I knew that there might be some cuts coming as a result of being acquired. And so I walked in and I was like, I'm so sorry, whatever. And I had my pen and my paper and whatnot. And then he proceeded to tell me that I was going to be employee number 1 let go. And then my team was going to be to follow. And that I was not going to get to say goodbye to my team. I was literally they were going to pack my office for me and courier the things back to my house. I happened to be going through a divorce at the time, which both of those individuals knew. I'd kept it sort of under wraps. And so I remember Stacy, the VP of HR, walking back to my office with me. And I had a good relationship with her. I'd disclosed to the COO that I was going through divorce soon after I had started. And he had told her, I'd asked him not to tell anybody, but he had told her as the HR person. And so she had disclosed to me that she had known. And I remember walking back into the office and just looking around because I had books and all my things. And she's like, don't worry about it. We're going to pack it all up and bring it to you, which also felt very degrading, right? I wasn't they'd already shut all my access down. My computer was not going with me. I wasn't going to get to say goodbye to my employees. I had 50 employees in 2 states. I had 3 sales teams in Belleville and 2 in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I wasn't going to get to say goodbye to my coworkers. The COO, unbeknownst to me, was walking into a room to let my coworkers across the country know that I had been let go. And I remember sitting there just crying in front of Stacy. I was like, I can't do this. I kept saying, I can't lose the house. I can't lose the house. I had an 11-year-old at the time. And I was and I thought we're going through the divorce. He already knew, but I thought I can't lose the house. I was like, I can't lose the house. She goes, we're going to take care of you. We're going to take care of you. We're going to take care of her. I didn't hear anything that was said that morning. I mean, she's I said, I was just in a daze, and I had to drive 50 minutes back to Wildwood. And I said to her, I don't think I heard anything that you said other than I've been fired. And she's like, when you reach out to me in the next few days, I'll go over everything again or whatnot. And I was like, okay. And it was just such a sinking feeling. And one of my very close coworkers who worked in Scranton, Pennsylvania at the call, he ran the call center. He was the head of the call center there. Brad, he reached out to me while I was still in the car after he'd heard. And then he reached out to me every day for 6 weeks, every day, 5 to 6 days a week, every day. How was your day? How is it going? I don't, it's funny. I don't even know if he'd ever been laid off before, but I needed that call every day. I looked forward to that call. And what I learned is like, you can really only job hunt about 3 or 4 hours a day. It's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And it is exhausting. It is like, going through, and then again, like the internet wasn't what it is today. So it wasn't as easy. There weren't Slack groups and all these other things. And again, like I hadn't ever worked locally either. And so, I had like all of like even Business Training Library was a local company. We sold nationally. Like I'd never worked for a company like even locally. So it was a big, but I was better prepared the second time. The first time was just, it really does catch you off guard. And I do think that perhaps I took the pet food job, I didn't feel desperate. I got a really nice severance package. The head of HR, the chief HR officer out of Herndon, Virginia, called me that afternoon. And I'd had a special relationship with him. We kind of had taken to each other early on when he came to visit the store, the office. And George had said to me, like, we're going to take care of you. And they did. They took care of me big time financially. He said, this wasn't anything that you did. And, I understand the circumstance that you're kind of in. I think they took pity on me a little bit. But you did have to get up every day and shower. Right. You could job search in your running shorts and your t-shirt, I decided, but you did have to shower every day. I did my job search in the morning and did self-care in the afternoon. I went to the gym, I worked out, I went for walks, I did hiking. I was home when my child got home for the first time ever. When my child got home from school, I was there for the first time ever. But I really felt like, your full-time job does become looking for a job, but it can't be 8 hours. It's just too exhausting. And the other thing is, like, you're going to need your network. Like, I wasn't one to ask for help at that point. And so, reaching out and asking people and telling, it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing, even though it wasn't performance related. It was embarrassing to say, I was the majority income provider of my family. And now I was about to be a single person. And that was really scary. So, the woman who lived across the street was the CEO of the American Red Cross for the majority of Missouri. And she was the breadwinner in her family as well. And so I leaned on her a lot. We did a lot of drinking on her patio and my deck over several weeks. But yeah, I mean, it's like, once you've been through those experiences, and I'll be honest with you, I was not the compassionate, empathetic person when someone, let me know that they'd lost their job if I'd never been through it. And I was like, oh, you'll find a new job. I did not know what you needed. And then, so now I'm the first person to reach out when that happens. And how can I help you? And let me make introductions and let me take you. And here's a bottle of wine and all the things that I know that you're going to need.
Sounds like, sometimes it's hard to look back and say blessing in disguise, but you learned a lot.
It was a growth. Yeah. I want to know that it was necessary for growth, but it definitely supersized the growth in a very short period of time.
What's interesting, and I wrote this down from earlier, you mentioned, you worked for women. So go back to Miss Fitzgerald.
Yep.
And Pam, but Pam didn't
work out for me, but I had lots of other I had a lot of other good female role models in executive roles.
And it sounds like the neighbor and so many people stepping in. Sometimes, and I don't know if it's so much today, but it's not long ago where you would hear a lot of miserable stories about women working for women. Sounds like that's not something you came across.
No, it actually isn't something I came across. I can't think of a bad experience. I don't know whether it was, I don't know why that is, to be honest with you, because you're right. There are a lot of bad experiences out there. I don't know. Maybe it was my confidence level and my, like, I don't give a shit attitude about that. Like, really, like I've probably never supported women as well as I needed to early on. I'm a much better supporter now than I used to be. Because honestly, like, I was happy being part of the boys club, right? I, again, didn't golf, just like you mentioned, you didn't golf. So the golfing, there was a big disadvantage for me. But like, I was the first to jump at happy hour and drink a beer with the guys. I loved sports. So you could sign me up for all sporting events, live or televised. So I didn't feel, I felt like, and the guys accepted me. So I actually had that network of men. I had a very strong network of men who supported me and that I could reach out to. Of the sales leader roundtable that I built, there was only one other woman, Lisa. The rest were men. And I was very comfortable in that environment. So maybe it was just because I wasn't paying attention. Maybe I had bad experiences, but I didn't see them as that, or they didn't occur to me, or I didn't see any jealousy or some of the other things that you talk about. I really didn't feel like I had a bad experience working for or with women.
Were you mentioned fitting right in with the guys. Was that ever intentional, or was that just more you?
I think that was just me. Again, I was very athletic growing up. I played on women's sports teams, but then I started playing racquetball at a pretty young age, and I had a sponsorship with Head. I traveled. I played for money. Back in the day, at the open level, you played for money. So, and again, although I was playing women, I was around a lot of male athletes in a very intimate type of setting. I mean, weekend tournaments, same people over and over and over again. We traveled together, we worked out together, we played together on and off the court. So that was very natural for me. And I also think being in that real estate world, where the majority of that is men as well, being an office rat and growing up and hanging out in my dad's office, he was having meetings, and as a broker, he got calls at night. So we're watching Dukes of Hazzard, and a call comes in from a real estate agent, needing some advice.
We had a salesperson on before who talked about something similar, but maybe she didn't golf, maybe she didn't. There might be certain things where she actually does golf, but certain things where she wasn't necessarily invited first.
That's right.
Or a part of. So what she talked about then was, well, I'm going to be the one to organize it and coordinate it, which it sounds like with your sales group.
Round table, absolutely. I need to do that. In other cases, I would just be like, hey, where are we watching March Madness this year? So yeah, I think I learned from both. I'm not one of those women that's anti the boys club. I think there's a lot to be learned, like you said, from their ability to network. And again, things roll off their back. They don't take things personally. They can have a bad business experience, and that doesn't impact a relationship. So I think there's a lot of positives to be learned from that network and how they network with each other.
Yeah, I joke with my husband. He's a big jokester, and he'll literally say a joke will come back to him, and he'll be like, why are you doing that? I said, because you just said this, and he totally forgot that he just said that. So I think men are very good, and that's probably potentially a detriment that women that we need to work on.
Having a short memory is a superpower.
Right. In the right instances, a big superpower. So for us who can adapt and try to take pieces from both of who we are naturally, but learn that we can be even better and stronger.
Agreed.
You mentioned something, again, leading up to this podcast, you talked about giving selflessly can lead to abundance. And is that what we were talking about early on saying, yes, I'm going to do it. Yes, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I think it's the 30 minutes for everything thing. I also give back within the industry. So I'm a mentor for a company here that's an early stage, backs early stage companies. They're an accelerator. So Capital Innovators, I'm a mentor for them. Lindenwood has an entrepreneurial major now and department, and I mentor for them. And I teach junior achievement because they have a financial every grade level's curriculum and junior achievement has a financial aspect. And I think again, they're not teaching it in school. Most parents don't know how to manage their own finances, so they're not teaching it to their children. My brother and me were very, very, very lucky to have been taught financial literacy and financial acumen at a very early age. And so I feel like those are the things that I feel like I have a responsibility to give back, because I did learn things differently than other people learned them. And so I think it's my responsibility to teach others what I was taught.
Mm-hmm. I relate to what you said earlier about becoming more aware about how to help, but also helping women and thinking through having mentors, being a mentor yourself. Are there instances, or I guess, how have you transitioned into that helping women more or mentoring? And are there certain times you can think of that it was really successful or shaped how you mentor women today?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think when you're in the moment, I don't think I always am cognizant of it in the moment. But over the last few years, women have reached out to me, and some men too, but a lot of women have reached out to me, either through LinkedIn or through email, and told me about the impact that I had on their career or their life, which was a little bit surprising, because some of these had happened years earlier. And it's always very rewarding and humbling. And it's really nice to hear. So, one of the things I always say to people is if you think about somebody, share that, because I think that's really, you never know what people's people are going through or what their day is like. So if someone looks nice, compliment them. If they helped you, let them know, because I don't think we always do that. And I think I think women might be more apt to do that than maybe men, which is why maybe I get reached out to by former female employees more often. But I do think in fairness, I think I probably put myself out there a little bit more with women that work for me. I've had, and there are very, like I said early on, the very first, one of the very first things I told you was very few women hunters, female hunters. And so I think those people I tend to gravitate towards, spend more time mentoring, because I know that it's harder for them. And I know that it's a bigger risk for them. But a lot of the women, and I think this came from kind of my upbringing with my family and my mother out earning my father at times, and then me out earning my husband at times. I've worked with a lot of women who out earned their husbands, and we have a lot of those after work conversations, as I call them, right? When everybody else has left and you're still there, and they toggle into your office, exhausted at the end of the day, or we go grab a glass of wine, because I think like, again, I saw it modeled, and I don't think a lot of women see it modeled, right? And so a lot of times, the first time that they know of anybody, like they know I out earned my husband at some point. I tell the story about my mother out earning my dad at points. And so I think a lot of times they come to me for that reason. Like, how do you handle this? How does that work in the family? How does that shift power? And I think I'm happy to have conversations about how to close your deal, but I'm also happy to have those conversations, right? About how do you handle that, that situation when, again, it may not have started out that way, right? Like your partner may have been out earning you. And then over time, as you've gotten better at your job and taken on bigger jobs and sold more and gotten that $1 million or $1.5 million quota, all of a sudden now you're out earning the person, that you sleep next to. And it is a different situation. And I think it does shift the power a little bit. And so I have a lot of those conversations too. I think specifically about two people that I've had that conversation with, one Rhonda and the other one Becky, who those were new situations for them. And I said, like, it is a different situation. And it's funny because I jokingly say, like, men have that's a lot of pressure, right? When you're the primary earner in your family, and maybe your partner stays home and maybe they don't, maybe they're working a job that doesn't make as much money, but you do feel that pressure. And women weren't raised to feel that, right? I mean, a lot of times, in the ages that we are, and the people that I mentor that are closer to my age, our fathers were probably the income earners, the primary income earner. I just happened to grow up in a different situation. And my dad was the primary income earner for a very long period of time. My mom was teaching school. She wasn't making any money. My dad was absolutely the primary earner, but then he wasn't the primary earner, right? And so that became a different situation. My dad was very budget oriented. My mom would be like, now I can afford to buy you the sweater that you want. And I was like, sweet. So like, just how we spent money, differed a little bit because my mother now had more control of the finances of the house and more say over the finances of the house. I had a former employee, Maggie, reach out to me recently through LinkedIn, and I've been having a really cruddy day. And she reached out and just said, hey, like, I'm about to do interview for my first sales leader position. And I'm not sure I would have had the courage to do that if you had not been my first sales leader and the things that you brought to the table for me. And I'd really had a bad day. And I was like, I reached out to her. I said, you never know. I said, who knows why the timing was the timing? I said, but you never know. And I said, thank you so much for reaching out and saying that. You had no idea that today was the day that I needed to hear that. But just the fact that you reached out and said it was the most important piece of that. And I've been following Becky's career since she left. She worked with me at the e-learning company. And I became a reference for her as she left that company and went to work for a different e-learning company. Made President's Club her first year. But when I talked to her boss, I said to her, I said to him, it was a him. I said to him when I did the reference check for her, and he goes, how can I best support her? And I said, tell her what she needs to know and get out of her way. And I said, if you'll do that, she will perform for you. I said, but do not micromanage her or even manage her really. Like, she's smart enough that she knows when to come for help. She'll come for help when she needs help. And I saw her post on Instagram that she'd made President's Club that first year, and I called her. And we still have sushi. We like to do sushi together, so we still have sushi occasionally together. But I think about I think I probably see the challenges that they're gonna face, and because there's so few female hunters in the world that I live in, it's easy to gravitate towards them. But I also have I've also built myself a little entrepreneurial female network, not just my women's sales pro group, but also other women that own their own businesses here in St. Louis. I tend to spend time with those folks and make sure that that we can support each other. Like you said, referring business to, thinking about my whole network, but making sure that we're including women in that when we support, so we can support each other and refer business back and forth. That's everything that the Women's Sales Pro Group is really about. The person who runs that group, it's very specific. We don't compete with each other. So everybody in there has a different swim lane so that we don't compete with each other and we can collaborate. Mm-hmm. So we can bring each other in on projects and use each other when we need to. And so, and my very first we do an annual conference. My very first conference, I became a member thanks to Mike Weinberg, who told Lori Richardson about me and said she should be part of your group. So he referred me in. A man actually got me into my Women's Sales Pro Group. But our very first conference in Minneapolis in 2019, right before the pandemic, we teach each other too. So we run our own sessions. So the members teach each other during that 3-day conference. And I had never seen a vulnerability at that level. I was in tears. I'd called Judy Sindicuse, who runs the Capital Innovators, when I left and said, I've never had an experience like this. Women openly talked about what they were charging, what they were making. We had a woman get up and say that she basically went bankrupt the year before and how it felt and how she worked her way back into where she's at today, but that she literally almost one bad business decision almost took her under. And I had just not seen that kind of vulnerability ever shown. We definitely didn't see it from the men in my network, and I hadn't really seen it from the women either. And it was just there were multiple sessions where tears were coming down, not just the speakers' faces, but those of us who were participating, because it was just your heart went out to them and you just couldn't believe that they were bold enough and brave enough to share their story in that way. But they shared it because they loved us. And they didn't want us making the same mistakes that they had made. And they thought, if I can save one person from, the things that I've gone through, one person whose partner had died of cancer and how they literally had taken a 6-month sabbatical from their consultancy business and the fear that went into that. But they said they just knew that they couldn't be good for their clients until they got good with themselves. It was a really amazing experience. So I think as I've spent more time, so I'm giving and getting, right? I'm still giving and getting, and particularly from women. So I do feel like it's my responsibility to give back. But I probably give back maybe a little harder with women coming up in sales, because it isn't an easy sport. Right. It isn't an easy sport to be a participant in.
Well, I think I liked a lot of what you said there. And it also circles back to what we talked about earlier, is about really knowing yourself and knowing yourself enough to be yourself. So in those groups, those women know themselves and are being themselves in those groups to be vulnerable. Authentic. Right. Yep. And you give out, you took so much away from others.
Yes.
So you give out so much for others to learn, but you also then, because you've taken that wall down, you're able to accept so much more and just keep growing yourself and being a better version of yourself.
Yeah, I think it's, I like the Jim Rohn quote, you'll be as successful as the 5 closest people to you. And so I say, I have a whole section of the book that talks about your circle matters. And it does matter. And I think you have to bring, smart, successful, high quality people into your life. And then I say, there's a time, if you believe in reason, season, and lifetime, there are times when you need to release people back into the wild. And again, it's going back to sometimes you need to know when to say no. And so when people are not going to be supportive of your journey or don't want to go on the journey with you, and it's fine, right? Everybody gets to map their own journey out. But you want people on your journey with you that are going to be supportive, that get you, that again, that aren't going to be jealous or try to tear you down. And so, I feel like over time, I've released people back into the wild. It's been sad to do so, but it's been necessary based on the circumstances. And so I think the other thing is really, you have to constantly be looking at your circle, and are the people around you making you better? That's what I want. I'd love them to make me smarter too, but preferably, my preference would be to be smarter. But I also, most importantly, I need them to make me a better person. I need them to challenge me when I need to be challenged. Needed to call me out. I'll be the first person to call you out. I can promise you that. But you need to be able to call me out. And sometimes my strong personality doesn't allow for people to do that. It's intimidating. But I need to be called out as well. And if I need to be stopped, I got called out last night by my son. I got excited when I get excited and passionate about something, like I go, and he was explaining something to me, and I said something. He goes, "You're interrupting me again." He's like, "You do this." And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm like, it really is from excitement and passion, not because I'm trying to be rude. But I said, I appreciate you pointing that out to me, because if I do it to you, I probably do it to other people. And it's something that I need to be more aware of. So I'm good with that. And that, like, no matter who it is, and I do believe that my child makes me better. It's a role reversal. I mean, you make them better when they're younger, and then they make you better when you're older. But I mean, like, you just have to surround yourself with the right people. And I think that's the most important thing. And I guess the motto I will leave you with, the Kristieism I will leave you with, is do the right things and the right things will happen. And I think it's just that simple.
There's so many things we could go back to that you spoke about that I wrote so many notes and I starred, but I don't know how you come back from that or keep going beyond that. Again, we could keep beyond tortilla with a weird cheese or whatever you said with Emo's Pizza. I wrote that down because that's hilarious. Beyond that, you said so many great things, but that's a great way to end it. So if we're thinking about, hey, I need 30 minutes with Kristie, or I think our company needs her help, or I know people who need her help. How do we find you? How do people find you? And who are the right people to reach out?
Yeah, I think, again, I do have 30 minutes for anybody. So if something I said resonated with you today and you've got further questions or you want some advice, I think reach out no matter what field you're in or where you're coming from. I'm great with that. LinkedIn is probably a great way to find me. So I'm on LinkedIn. I have Instagram. I have a Twitter account, and I have a new YouTube channel if you want to check that out and subscribe. I've been doing a lot of videos. I have a fabulous videographer who's been spending a lot of time with me, taking videos and editing videos for me. So
full disclosure, I might be married to him.
You might be married to my videographer, whose name may or may not be JJ,
who may be in the corner.
Who might be over here on my left shoulder. But no, so I finally, thanks to great video and thanks to JJ, I now have a YouTube channel as well. So lots of places you can find me. My website is salesaccelerationgroup.com. I have a blog that's chocked full of content because, again, I love to write. I also write for Top Sales World magazine. I was in the May issue. I'm going to be in the August issue. So that's a great magazine in general. Some of the best sales minds are writing for that across the world. So they're out of the UK. So I would plug them as well. There's lots of great places to go for sales resources. So, and I dropped a bunch of names today. And a lot of those people also have books or podcasts or content that they're writing. So again, be a lifelong learner and reach out and educate yourself, right? Be your own best professional development advocate.
And this will be in the notes, but Kristie is Kristie, Jones, as you would think.
Yes.
And coming some point soon, whenever this is released,
yes,
maybe out, your new book, Selling Your Way In.
Yes.
So to keep an eye out for that too.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your story, your time, your vulnerability, sharing so much. I know I learned a lot, had a fun time, and I'm sure those who listen will too.
This concludes another episode of the She Lift Project podcast. To hear more episodes of the show, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And to learn more about our mission of helping women reach higher levels of success, visit sheliftproject.com and sign up to receive the latest news, ebooks, videos, and more.